He signed the paper without reading it. That's how Eric Matthews did everything. Fast, blind, like the details didn't matter. But this time, the details mattered, because the name printed under lead surgeon belonged to the woman he destroyed 5 years ago. The woman who walked out of his apartment in December and never looked back. The woman who was now standing over his open chest in an operating room on the 12th floor of Mount Sinai, 3 months pregnant with his child. And he had no idea. The billionaire signed the surgery consent, not knowing the doctor was his pregnant ex. The pen didn't hesitate. Eric Matthews signed the surgical consent form the way he signed everything, without reading it. Quick stroke, hard press, the kind of signature that cost other people millions. He was on the phone with Singapore when Jonas Singer slid the clipboard under his hand, and Eric barely glanced at it. Just another form, just another thing between him and the call that mattered. The private suite on the 12th floor of Mount Sinai smelled like industrial cleaner and fresh linens, the kind of aggressive sterility that expensive hospitals specialize in. The radiator under the window ticked every few seconds, not broken, just old, the way everything in buildings over a certain age tends to be in Manhattan. Outside, the Upper East Side was doing its Tuesday thing, cabs honking on Madison, a jackhammer going somewhere near 97th, pigeons on the ledge that nobody had cleaned in months. Jonas stood by the bed holding a leather portfolio, looking the way Jonas always looked, like he was 3 minutes ahead of the rest of the world and quietly annoyed about it. 10 years he'd worked for Eric. He knew when to talk and when to stand there. This was a standing there moment. Xavier Chavez blocked the doorway, 6'2", former Marine, the kind of guy who wore a suit like it was body armor. He didn't say much, didn't need to. His job was to make sure nobody got to Eric Matthews without an appointment, and he was very, very good at his job. Eric ended the Singapore call and dropped the phone on the blanket. The electrodes on his chest pulled when he shifted. "What's the timeline?" "Surgery's at 7 tomorrow morning," Jonas said. "Dr. Young is leading. She's apparently the best they've got for this type of procedure." Eric didn't react to the name, didn't even hear it really. His brain was already on the next thing, the quarterly earnings report that needed his sign-off before Friday. The board meeting he was missing. The 17 unread messages on his phone from people who needed him to decide something. That was the thing about being Eric Matthews. There was always a next thing. He leaned back against the pillow and stared at the ceiling. White, spotless. The kind of ceiling you only see in hospitals and expensive hotels. His chest ached. Not the sharp kind, the dull kind. The kind that had been there for months, and that he'd been calling stress until the afternoon in March, when he collapsed on the floor of his own conference room and Jonas called 911 while Xavier loosened his tie. Ventricular arrhythmia. Multiple focal points in the left ventricle. A rare variant that his cardiologist at NYU had called concerning, and that his cardiologist here at Sinai had called, "You needed this surgery 6 months ago." Eric Matthews, the man whose fund moved more money before lunch than most companies saw in a fiscal year, had a heart that was failing. The irony wasn't lost on him, he just didn't find it funny. 700 miles south and 5 years back, the story started differently. Amanda Young grew up in a 2.5-bedroom house in Scranton, Pennsylvania. The half was a basement room her mother, Laura Hunter, used for storing nursing uniforms and old medical textbooks she never threw away. Laura worked double shifts at Geisinger Community Medical Center, left the house at 5:30 in the morning, came back at 10 at night, hands smelling like rubbing alcohol and industrial soap, eyes so deep-set from exhaustion they looked bruised. Amanda's father left when she was 7. No fight, no suitcase by the door. One morning he was at the kitchen table complaining about the price of gas, and the next morning the chair was empty. Laura never explained. Amanda never asked. But for years, every time the front door opened, Amanda looked up, waiting, until she stopped. That did something to her. Something that doesn't have a clinical name, but that anyone who's ever been left recognizes on sight. The quiet understanding that if you need someone, they leave. So you stop needing anyone, ever. She buried everything in work. Full scholarship to Cornell, pre-med, top of her class, the kind of student who made professors uncomfortable because she was always the last one in the library and the first one in the lab. Residency at Johns Hopkins, where she slept 3 hours a night and survived on black coffee and protein bars from a vending machine on the 3rd floor that ate your quarters half the time. Cardiovascular Surgery Fellowship at Mount Sinai. By 32, she was a senior fellow. By 34, the youngest surgeon to head the cardiac ablation unit at the hospital. Colleagues respected her. Residents were afraid of her. Patients trusted her with their lives, which was the point, because Amanda Young's hands did not shake. Not during an 8-hour procedure, not during a code blue, not ever. Nobody saw the rest. Nobody saw that she still slept on the right side of the bed, leaving the left empty like someone was coming back. That she kept a navy blue shirt folded inside a plastic bag at the bottom of her closet because she couldn't bring herself to throw it away and couldn't explain why. That in winter, when the wind cut down 5th Avenue like a blade, she walked faster past 74th Street because that's where Eric's apartment was, and she couldn't look at those windows without her throat closing up. The pregnancy happened in Boston. A cardiology conference at the Omni Parker House in October. The hotel with the dark wood paneling and the lobby bar where all the doctors went after the panels because it was the only bar within walking distance that didn't card you for looking tired. Amanda had presented that afternoon, something about minimally invasive techniques. She'd been good. She was always good. She went down to the bar at 9 and Eric was there, sitting alone, bourbon. Blanton's she knew without asking, because that was the only bourbon he drank, the kind of unnecessary specificity that she hated herself for remembering. He was in a grey sweater, sleeves pushed up, and he looked the way he always looked when he wasn't performing for an audience. Lost. Not sad. Exactly. Just untethered. Like a man who had everything and couldn't figure out why it wasn't enough. They hadn't spoken in 4 years and 8 months. Amanda knew the exact count. She hated that she knew. What happened that night wasn't planned, wasn't romantic. It was a collision, 2 bodies that remembered each other meeting in an impersonal hotel room, not talking about anything that mattered, as if putting words to what they felt was more dangerous than whatever they were doing with their hands. Amanda left before he woke up. Took an Uber to Logan at 5 in the morning, hair still damp, hands smelling like his cologne, with the kind of shame that doesn't hit right away, but shows up 3 days later at 2 in the morning when you're staring at the ceiling. 3 weeks after Boston, sitting on the bathroom floor of her apartment in Gramercy Park, staring at 2 pink lines on a pharmacy test, Amanda made a decision. Eric Matthews would never know. She would raise this child alone, the way she'd done everything. Meanwhile, 12 floors up at Mount Sinai, Eric Matthews was lying in bed, not sleeping, scrolling through emails he wasn't reading, while a machine beeped his heartbeat in steady green lines across a screen he refused to look at. Tomorrow, someone he'd never met, some surgeon whose name he'd already forgotten, would thread a catheter into his heart and burn away the tissue that was killing him. He closed his eyes. The radiator ticked. His phone buzzed. Jonas, probably. Or the Singapore team. Or Gus Colliard, his lawyer, who'd sent 4 emails about the estate documents Eric kept putting off, because thinking about what happens when you die requires acknowledging that you might. He didn't answer any of them. In the hallway outside, a nurse dropped a clipboard. The sound was louder than it should have been. Eric flinched. His heart skipped, literally, and the monitor beeped twice, fast, then settled. He pressed his palm flat against his chest, felt the irregular rhythm under his ribs, the thing that was supposed to keep him alive, malfunctioning, like everything else. The lights in the hallway dimmed. Shift change. Somewhere on the floor, a phone rang and nobody answered. Eric Matthews fell asleep at 11:47, still holding his phone, still wearing the hospital gown that tied in the back and left you feeling like you weren't wearing anything at all. 7 floors below, in a windowless office that smelled like old coffee and printer toner, Amanda Young sat at her desk, staring at a surgical schedule on her computer screen. Matthews Eric J. cardiac ablation. Tomorrow, 7:0 a.m. Her coffee had gone cold. The mug said World's OKS Doctor, a gag gift from Addison Corday, her only real friend in the department. Amanda had been staring at the screen for 11 minutes. She knew because the clock in the corner of the monitor ticked forward while she sat there, motionless, one hand on the desk and the other resting on her stomach. She should have transferred the case. She knew that. Any ethics board would say the same. But Eric's condition, the multifocal ventricular arrhythmia, the rare variant that showed up on the mapping like a constellation of bad decisions, required a specialist. 2 surgeons in the hospital could do it. One was on medical leave in Zurich. The other was her. Amanda closed the schedule, opened it again, closed it. The fluorescent light above her desk flickered. It had been doing that for weeks, and nobody from maintenance had come to fix it, because that's how hospitals work. You put in a request. You wait. The light keeps flickering. She picked up her phone, put it down, picked it up again. Then she stood, grabbed her coat, and walked to the elevator. The doors closed. She pressed B2, the parking garage. Her Honda Civic, silver, 11 years old, the same car she'd been driving since residency because buying a new one felt like admitting she had money now, was parked in the far corner where nobody went. She sat in the driver's seat for 6 minutes without turning the engine on. Then she drove home. Eric Matthews was born into money the way some people are born into religion. It was everywhere. It shaped everything. And nobody talked about what it actually cost. His father, John Kramer, inherited an oil fortune out of Midland, Texas. The kind of money that bought silence, distance, and a ranch outside of Austin with 300 acres and no neighbors close enough to hear you yell. John was 6'3", broad, spoke in sentences that never exceeded 10 words, and drank Maker's Mark the way other men drank water, steadily, without ceremony, from afternoon until he went to bed. Eric's mother played piano. That was the thing he remembered most, and it was also the thing he tried hardest not to think about. The sound of her playing Chopin in the living room on Saturday mornings, while John was out on the property and Eric sat on the carpet near her feet, doing nothing, just listening. She had blonde hair that she wore down and a laugh that filled rooms. She was the only warm thing in a house made of stone and leather and old money. She died on a Tuesday in April, cerebral aneurysm. Eric was 12. He was at school, 7th grade, Mrs. Callahan's history class. Something about the Louisiana Purchase, when the vice principal came to the door and asked him to step into the hallway. His backpack was still at his desk when he left. He never went back for it. John Kramer was sitting on the kitchen floor when Eric got home, just sitting there on the white tile holding his wife's hand. The paramedics had already come and gone. The hand was cold. Eric knew because he touched it. He was 12 years old and he touched his dead mother's hand and nobody told him not to. After that, John dismantled everything. Photos came down. Clothes went into boxes. The piano, the Steinway grand that she'd played every morning, got sold to a dealer in Dallas 3 weeks later. Eric came home from school and the living room had a gap in it, a rectangle of lighter wood on the floor where the piano had been, and John didn't mention it. Not that day, not ever. John Kramer never said "I love you" again. Not once, not in any context, not even close. He provided. He paid for things. He signed checks and shook hands and showed up to parent-teacher conferences in pressed shirts and said the right things to the right people. But the man who'd sat on the kitchen floor holding his wife's dead hand, that man was gone. Replaced by something efficient, something organized, something that treated Eric like an asset to be managed rather than a son to be raised. And Eric learned. The way kids learn everything that isn't said out loud, through silence, through absence, through the careful observation of what isn't there. He learned that loving someone was exposure, and exposure was loss, and loss was the only thing in the world that John Kramer's money couldn't fix. At 25, Eric married Allison Carey. Allison was a corporate attorney from Greenwich, Connecticut. Old family, good teeth, the kind of woman who looked appropriate at fundraisers and knew how to make conversation with senators' wives without saying anything real. The wedding was at a country club in Westport. 200 guests. Filet mignon, a band that played At Last for the first dance, while Eric held Allison's waist and thought about nothing. They had a son, Daniel Matthews, born at Greenwich Hospital on a Wednesday morning in March, 7 pounds and 4 ounces, with a face so red and furious that the nurse laughed. Eric held him and felt something he didn't have a word for. something that cracked open for about 30 seconds before he pushed it back down, because that's what he did with feelings. He pushed them down, 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 where they couldn't reach him and he couldn't reach them. The marriage lasted 6 years. Alison filed for divorce when Daniel was 10. She didn't cry about it, which told Eric everything he needed to know about how long she'd been planning. She sat across from him at the kitchen table in their house in Greenwich, the one with the sub-zero fridge and the breakfast nook that nobody ate breakfast in, and said, "You're here for every dinner, Eric, and you're gone for every moment that matters." Eric didn't argue, didn't fight for it. Signed the papers the way he signed everything, quick, clean, final. Daniel was 16 now, same dark hair, same ice blue eyes, same jaw that tensed when he was angry, which was often because 16-year-old boys whose fathers cancel weekends are always angry about something, even if they can't name it. He lived with Alison in a colonial on a tree-lined street in Greenwich, and played lacrosse and got decent grades, and spoke to Eric on the phone every Sunday at 6, conversations that lasted between 8 and 12 minutes and covered school sports and weather in that order, and nothing that either of them actually wanted to say. Eric knew he was becoming John Kramer. He knew it the way you know you're getting a cold. The signs are all there and you can feel it coming, but you keep telling yourself it's something else. He saw it in the way Daniel's shoulders dropped when he walked into Eric's hospital room and didn't know what to do with his hands. He saw it in the way Daniel sat in the visitor's chair for 15 minutes, talked about lacrosse, and left without hugging him. He saw it and it made him sick, and he didn't change anything, because changing would mean opening the door that John Kramer welded shut 27 years ago on a kitchen floor in Texas, and Eric didn't know what was behind it anymore. He just knew it was heavy. 5 years ago, Amanda had tried to open that door. They'd been together for 2 years, met at a fundraiser at the Met, one of those black tie things where everyone's drinking champagne and pretending to care about contemporary art. Amanda was there because the hospital had a table. Eric was there because his PR team said he needed to be photographed at cultural events. She was wearing a dark green dress she'd borrowed from Addison, and heels that were half a size too small. He was standing by the bar, alone, looking at a painting he clearly didn't understand, with an expression on his face that was either confusion or contempt, and Amanda found that funny. She found him funny. Not many people found Eric Matthews funny, which was maybe why he'd looked at her the way he did when she walked over and said, "You look like you're trying to negotiate with that painting." 2 years, his apartment on 74th, her toothbrush in his bathroom, her coat on the hook by the door, takeout containers from the Thai place on 2nd Avenue, mornings when he woke up before her and she'd feel him watching her sleep, his hand resting on her hip like he was making sure she was real. Those were the good parts, the parts she kept. But Amanda wanted more. She wanted words. Wanted him to say out loud the things she saw in his eyes when he thought she was sleeping. Wanted commitment. Not a ring, necessarily. Just some acknowledgement that this was going somewhere, that she wasn't temporary, that he wasn't going to wake up one morning and decide she was too close. And Eric, instead of admitting that he was terrified, instead of saying, "I don't know how to do this, but I want to try," which was probably the truth, did what he always did when someone got too close. He demolished it. December. The apartment on 74th. The lights were off except for the kitchen. He'd been drinking, not a lot, just enough to make his edges sharper. She'd asked him again about the future, about them, about what this was. And he said things. Cold things. Precise things. The kind of things you say when you know exactly where someone's soft spots are and you aim for every one of them. He told her he didn't love her. He told her he never had. He told her this, them, was convenient, and that convenient had an expiration date and that she'd reached hers. None of it was true. Every word of it landed. Amanda picked up her coat from the hook by the door. She didn't cry, didn't raise her voice, didn't slam anything. She just looked at him, this long, steady look that was worse than any scream, and walked out. The door clicked shut behind her, quiet like a period at the end of a sentence. Eric stood in the dark kitchen, bourbon in his hand, jaw locked, something cracking inside his chest that he spent the next 5 years pretending was nothing. Now that same chest was failing. The morning of the surgery, Eric woke at 5:40. The room was grey. The radiator was ticking. His phone showed 14 unread messages and 2 missed calls from Jonas. The hospital gown had ridden up during the night, and he was cold, the kind of cold that has nothing to do with temperature. A nurse came in at 6, cheerful, Puerto Rican accent. She checked his vitals, adjusted his IV, asked if he needed anything. He said no. She left. At 6:30, the anesthesiologist arrived. A bald man with glasses and a calm voice who explained what would happen in terms that were meant to be reassuring and weren't. Eric signed one more form, another signature, another thing he didn't read. At 6:50, they wheeled him to pre-op. The hallway was long and bright and smelled like antiseptic. The wheels of the gurney squeaked. One of them, the front left, made a clicking sound with every rotation, like a metronome counting down to something. At 7:02, the surgical team was assembled. Eric was on the table. The sedation had started to warm, heavy, pulling him down. The lights were so bright they turned everything white. Shapes moved around him. Someone adjusted a monitor. Someone said something about catheter calibration. And then a figure in a blue surgical gown stepped into his line of sight from the left, mask over the nose and mouth, cap covering the hair, gloves already on. But the eyes. Green. The specific green that he'd spent 5 years trying to forget and couldn't. The green he saw every time he closed his own eyes in the dark. The green that was the last thing he'd looked at in that apartment on 74th Street before Amanda walked out and the door clicked shut. He tried to lift his head, tried to say something, but the sedation was already pulling, heavy, warm, relentless. And the last thing Eric Matthews registered before everything went dark was Amanda's voice, steady and clinical and completely unrecognizable in its professional cadence, saying to the team, "We're ready. Let's begin." The anesthesia took him. The monitors beeped, the fluorescent lights hummed, and Amanda Young stood over the man who broke her heart 5 years ago, held a catheter that would thread into the organ that was killing him, and got to work. Her hands didn't shake. They never did. Eric woke up in recovery at 10:14 in the morning. The room was too bright. His chest felt like someone had parked a car on it. Not pain exactly, but pressure. Heaviness. The kind of sensation that makes you aware of the fact that you have a body, which is not something Eric Matthews generally spent time thinking about. The first thing he saw was the ceiling. White, acoustic tiles. One of them had a water stain in the shape of something he couldn't identify. He stared at it for a while. The second thing he saw was Jonas Singer, sitting in the visitor's chair with his laptop open, typing quietly. A half-eaten turkey sandwich from the hospital cafeteria balanced on his knee. Jonas looked up. "You're awake. What time is it?" 10:15. Surgery went well. 3 hours. No complications. Jonas closed the laptop. The doctor said she'd come by this afternoon for the post-op check. Eric's brain was still thick with anesthesia residue, the kind of fog that makes everything feel like it's happening behind glass. But that word, she, snagged on something. A fragment. Green eyes behind a surgical mask. A voice saying, "Let's begin." The memory was blurred, underwater, but it was there. Jonas. His voice was raw, scratchy. "Who's my surgeon?" Jonas checked his phone. Dr. Amanda Young, head of the cardiac ablation unit. I know who she is." Jonas looked up. The sandwich slid 1/2 inch on his knee. He caught it without looking, a reflex born of 10 years of catching things Eric dropped, literally and figuratively. "You know her?" Eric didn't answer. He turned his head toward the window. The Upper East Side was out there, doing its thing, cabs and buses and people who didn't have holes in their chests, and ex-girlfriends threading catheters through their ventricles. Jonas waited. Eric said nothing. After a while, Jonas reopened his laptop and went back to typing. The turkey sandwich sat untouched. Amanda didn't come for the post-op check until 4:30. She'd spent the 6 hours after surgery in her office, door closed, reviewing charts she didn't need to review, eating a kind bar she didn't taste, and sitting in her desk chair with both hands flat on the surface like she was bracing for an earthquake. Addison Corday knocked twice. Amanda said she was busy. Addison knew what busy meant when Amanda's voice sounded like that. It meant don't push. so she left a coffee outside the door and went back to her rounds. At 4:28, Amanda stood up, straightened her lab coat, checked herself in the small mirror she kept in her desk drawer. The mascara from this morning was smudged under her left eye. She wiped it with her thumb. It didn't help much. She stopped trying. She took the elevator to the 12th floor. The hallway was quiet. Visiting hours didn't start until 5, and the nurses were between shifts, that dead zone in the afternoon when hospitals feel like they're holding their breath. The linoleum squeaked under her shoes. Somewhere a TV played a commercial for car insurance. She knocked on 1207. 2 quick knocks. Professional. "Come in." She opened the door. Eric was sitting up. The hospital gown made him look smaller than he was, which was something Amanda had noticed with other patients but never expected to see on him. His dark hair was flat on one side from the pillow. There were circles under his eyes, purplish-grey, and a day's worth of stubble on his jaw that he obviously hadn't bothered to deal with. The monitors beeped steadily behind him. The room smelled like institutional soap and the remnants of whatever Jonas had been eating. Jonas was gone. Xavier Chavez was posted outside the door. Amanda had walked past him on the way in, and he'd looked at her with the kind of neutral attention that security people have, the kind that sees everything and says nothing. "Mr. Matthews." She kept her voice clinical, even, the voice she used for patients, not for people. "How are you feeling?" "Like someone threaded a wire through my heart." He was looking at her, really looking, not at the chart in her hand or the stethoscope around her neck or the lab coat, at her. That's essentially what happened. She stepped closer, kept her eyes on the chart. "Your vitals are stable. Heart rhythm is normalizing. We'll monitor you overnight and reassess in the morning." "Amanda." She stopped writing. The pen hovered above the paper. "We're not doing that," she said. Quiet. Final. "Doing what?" "First names. This is a clinical relationship, Mr. Matthews." He leaned back against the pillow. That jaw tension thing, the one she used to trace with her finger in the dark, back when things were different, was happening. "You operated on me. That's my job. You could have transferred the case. There was no qualified alternative available for your specific condition." She clicked the pen. Once, twice. "Your follow-up is scheduled for tomorrow at 8. Get some rest." She turned toward the door. "Why didn't you tell me?" Amanda stopped. Her hand was on the door handle. The fluorescent light in the hallway buzzed, that high-pitched whine that you stop hearing after a while, until suddenly you hear it again and can't stop. "Tell you what?" she asked, not turning around. "That you were here. That you'd be the one." He stopped, ran a hand over his face. The IV tugged. "I signed that consent form. Your name was on it. I didn't even look. Most patients don't read the consent forms. I'm not most patients. Right now, that's exactly what you are." She opened the door, stepped into the hallway. The fluorescent light buzzed. Xavier Chavez shifted his weight by the elevator. Amanda walked past him without making eye contact, turned the corner, and made it exactly 14 steps before she stopped, leaned against the wall, and pressed both hands flat against the cool plaster. Her hands were shaking. The post-op checks continued. Once a day, sometimes twice for the next 5 days. Amanda kept them short, clinical. She'd walk in, check the chart, listen to his heart through the stethoscope, which required her to stand close enough to smell the hospital soap on his skin and the faint trace of something else, something that might have been cologne or might have been memory. She couldn't tell anymore. Ask her standard questions, write her notes, and leave. 4 minutes. Sometimes 5. Never more. Eric tried, every time, to pull her out of the script. He'd ask about her work. She'd redirect to his vitals. He'd mention the weather. "It's supposed to rain this weekend, did you see?" And she'd say, "Your potassium levels are slightly elevated. We're adjusting the drip." He'd go quiet. She'd leave. The door would close, and both of them would sit in the silence that followed, on opposite sides of a wall, feeling something neither of them was willing to name. Jonas Singer noticed first. He didn't say anything. Jonas was smart enough to know that some doors you don't knock on, but he started watching. The way Eric's face changed when Amanda walked in. The way his voice dropped half a register. The way he stopped looking at his phone during her visits, which was the most telling sign of all, because Eric Matthews always looked at his phone. Xavier Chavez noticed second. He was posted outside 12:07 for 10 hours a day, which gave him plenty of time to observe the rhythm of the floor. He noticed that Dr. Young adjusted her coat before entering Eric's room, a small tug on the lapel, barely visible, the kind of thing you do when you care about how you look and don't want to admit it. He noticed that she never stood on the left side of the bed, always the right, like the left side was claimed. He noticed, after about a week, that her lab coat didn't fit the same way it had on the first day. The buttons pulled slightly at the midsection. He filed that away and said nothing to anyone. On the fourth night, Eric couldn't sleep. The arrhythmia was controlled, the ablation had done its job, and the irregular beats were down to occasional flutters that the medication handled. But sleep was another matter. His brain wouldn't stop. It kept circling back to the same thing, the same face, the same green eyes, the same question that he didn't have an answer to, and that nobody was going to give him one. At 11:40, he got out of bed, slowly. The IV pole was on wheels, which helped. He put on the hospital-issue slippers, thin, grey, the kind that make you feel like you're in an institution because you are, and walked into the hallway. The floor was quiet. Night shift. A nurse sat at the station halfway down the corridor, scrolling her phone, barely looking up. The lights were dim to that half-wattage that hospitals use at night, the kind that makes everything look sepia-toned and slightly unreal. Eric walked to the end of the hall, turned right, and found the doctor's lounge. The door was cracked, a thin strip of light. He pushed it open. Amanda was inside. Alone. Sitting in one of those terrible grey plastic chairs, the molded kind that makes your back hurt after 10 minutes. She had a half-eaten sandwich on the table, turkey maybe, it was hard to tell under the fluorescent light, and a stack of charts on her lap. Her lab coat was wrinkled. Her hair was down, out of the coquet, loose around her shoulders, the way she only wore it when she was off the clock. She had dark circles under her eyes and a pen tucked behind her ear that she'd clearly forgotten about. She didn't hear him come in, didn't look up until the door wheezed shut on its pneumatic hinge, that slow, pressurized shh that sounds like the building is exhaling. Their eyes met, 5 seconds of silence that felt like 5 minutes. "Can't sleep," she said. "Not clinical this time, just tired." "Can't stop thinking." He leaned against the doorframe. The IV pole clinked against the metal. "You?" "Charting." She held up a folder, as if that explained the dark circles and the untouched sandwich, and the fact that she was sitting alone in a fluorescent-lit room at midnight. "You always did that," he said. "Worked instead of slept." Amanda put the chart down. "Why are you here, Eric?" First name. She caught it the moment she said it. He saw the flash of something across her face, irritation or regret or both, but she didn't correct herself. "I wanted to ask you something." "Ask your day nurse." "Why did you take my case?" She looked at him. Really looked. The pen behind her ear caught the light. "Because no one else could do it as well as I can." "That's the professional answer. That's the only answer you're getting." He shifted his weight. The slippers made a scuffing sound on the linoleum. "If that were the only answer, your hands wouldn't be shaking." Amanda looked down at her hands. They were resting on the chart, fingers slightly apart. And they weren't still. A fine tremor, barely visible, the kind that someone who didn't know her body intimately would never notice. She closed her fists. "Good night, Mr. Matthews." "Eric, good night." He didn't leave. She didn't ask him to. And for a while, maybe 3 minutes, maybe 5, time went strange in that room. They stayed like that. Him in the doorway. Her in the plastic chair. The fluorescent light humming. The sandwich getting colder. The hospital settling into its nighttime sounds. The distant ding of an elevator. The soft beep of a monitor somewhere down the hall. The faint clatter of a cart being wheeled across linoleum. Neither of them said another word. Eventually Eric turned and walked back to his room. The IV pole clicked against the floor with every step. Amanda sat in the lounge for another 20 minutes. Then she stood up, threw away the sandwich, gathered her charts, and took the elevator down to B2. She sat in the Honda Civic for 8 minutes without starting the engine. Then she drove home. The cracks showed up in the second week. Not the big dramatic kind, the small kind. The kind that start at the edges and work their way in, like water finding the seams in a foundation. The kind you don't notice until the whole thing shifts. It started with a patient, a 63-year-old man named Gerald Russo, retired schoolteacher from Queens, married 41 years, 3 grandkids, a heart condition that had been managed with medication until it suddenly wasn't. Amanda had him scheduled for a catheter procedure Tuesday morning. By Tuesday afternoon, he was gone. Cardiac arrest on the table, full protocol. Nothing worked. Eric was in the hallway when it happened. He'd been walking, the nurses encouraged it, said movement helped the recovery, shuffling along in his slippers with the IV pole clicking beside him like a third leg. He saw Amanda come out of the OR. Mask pulled down, hair escaping from the cap, face completely blank, the way faces get when the person behind them has shut everything off to keep from falling apart in public. She walked past him without seeing him, turned the corner, pushed through the door to the women's restroom. Eric stood in the hallway. The fluorescent lights buzzed. A custodian was mopping the floor near the elevator, headphones in, not paying attention to anything. Through the restroom door, thin, institutional, not built for privacy, he heard crying. Not the loud kind, the controlled kind, the kind that comes out in short, tight bursts because you're trying to swallow it, and it keeps coming up anyway. He stood there for almost 2 minutes. Then he turned around and walked back to his room. When Amanda came by for the post-op check that afternoon, her eyes were red at the edges, but her voice was steady. She checked his chart, listened to his heart, said his recovery was on track. He didn't bring up Gerald Russo. He didn't ask if she was okay. He just looked at her, and she looked at the chart. And the thing between them, the thing that was always between them, had been between them for 5 years, got heavier. Thursday of the second week, 3:17 in the afternoon. Eric was in his room when it happened. The tachycardia hit without warning. 1 second he was fine, sitting up in bed reading a financial report on his tablet, and the next second his heart was hammering at 160 beats per minute, the monitor screaming, the room tilting sideways. A nurse came in fast, then another, then Amanda. She was there in under a minute. She'd been on the floor, reviewing charts at the nurses' station, and she came through the door already issuing orders, medication adjustments, beta blocker increase, monitoring protocol. Her voice was calm, her hands were fast, professional, controlled, but for about 30 seconds, the 30 seconds between when the alarm went off and when the medication kicked in and the heart rate started dropping, Eric's face did something Amanda hadn't seen before. Not in 2 years of dating him, not in the breakup, not in any of it. Fear. Real, undeniable, animal fear. The kind that strips away everything, money, power, control, the carefully constructed walls that took decades to build, and leaves just a person who doesn't want to die, who is realizing in the loudest possible way that his body doesn't care about his net worth or his board meetings or his quarterly earnings. His body just wants to keep going, and right now it's not sure it can. The medication took hold. His heart rate dropped, 140, 120, 110, 98. The monitors stopped screaming. The nurses relaxed. Amanda wrote something on the chart, spoke quietly to the team and left. In the doorway, she stopped, just for a second, turned her head slightly. Not all the way, not enough to make eye contact, just enough that Eric could see her profile, the straight nose, the set of her jaw, the hand that was resting on the doorframe, fingers gripping the metal just a little too tight. Then she was gone. That night, Eric called Daniel. Not the Sunday at 6 call, not the scheduled, structured 12-minute conversation about school and lacrosse. This was a Thursday at 9 p.m. call. And Daniel answered on the 4th ring with the cautious voice of a teenager who knows something is off when the routine breaks. "Dad?" "Hey." Eric's voice was rough. The episode that afternoon had left him drained. Not tired exactly, but empty, like something had been squeezed out of him and hadn't been put back. "How's school?" "It's fine." A pause. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine. Mom said you're in the hospital. It's routine, don't worry about it." Silence. The kind of silence that happens between fathers and sons when both of them want to say something real and neither of them knows how. "Dad? Yeah. I could come this weekend if you want. Like, I don't have a game Saturday, so yeah." Eric's throat did something he didn't authorize, tightened, closed up. "Yeah, yeah, come." Okay. More silence. Then Daniel said, "Night, Dad," and Eric said, "Night, Bud," and the call ended, and Eric sat in the hospital bed staring at his phone screen. Call ended 3:47 sec, and felt something move inside his chest that had nothing to do with arrhythmia. Daniel came Saturday. He showed up at 11 in the morning, tall and awkward, wearing a Patagonia fleece and sneakers that were half untied, the way 16-year-old boys wear sneakers. Allison had dropped him off at the lobby. She didn't come up, which was its own kind of statement, and Eric didn't ask about it. The visit lasted 22 minutes. They talked about school, about lacrosse, about the new coach who made them run suicides at the end of every practice. Daniel sat in the visitor's chair with his knees apart and his hands in his lap, and Eric sat in bed, and they were polite with each other in the way that families are polite when they've lost the language for being honest. When Daniel left, he paused at the door, shifted his weight, looked at the floor. "I hope you feel better," he said. And then he was gone, his sneakers squeaking on the linoleum, and Eric watched the door close and felt the full, terrible weight of every Saturday he'd cancelled, every Sunday call he'd cut short, every moment he'd chosen a spreadsheet over this kid who had his eyes and his jaw, and his inability to say the thing he actually meant. Amanda saw the whole thing. She was in the hallway, had been walking toward the nurse's station with a chart in her hand when Daniel came out of 1207. She saw the kid, tall, dark-haired, those unmistakable blue eyes, and she stopped. Watched him walk to the elevator, watched the way his shoulders were set, that particular slope that comes from wanting something you've given up on getting. She stood there for a moment after the elevator doors closed. One hand was on the chart, the other was on her stomach. She'd been doing that a lot lately, the hand-on-stomach thing. Not consciously. It was automatic, the way you touch a bruise to see if it still hurts. 13 weeks. The nausea had mostly passed, replaced by a tiredness that sat in her bones, like a second skeleton. She'd switched to a larger lab coat, size medium instead of small, and started wearing scrub tops that were looser in the front. Nobody had noticed, or at least nobody had said anything. But watching Daniel Matthews walk to the elevator, this teenager who had everything money could buy and nothing that money couldn't, did something to her, made the abstract suddenly concrete. She wasn't just carrying a pregnancy, she was carrying a person who would one day be 16 and awkward and unsure, and who would need things from her that she'd have to figure out how to give, because nobody had given them to her. She went back to her office, closed the door, sat in the chair, put both hands on the desk, cried for exactly 4 minutes, then stopped, washed her face in the sink, went back to work. Obi Tate ruined everything on a Wednesday. Obi was a recovery floor nurse, big guy, friendly, the kind of person who talked to everyone about everything and had never in his life understood the concept of a whisper. He'd been at Mount Sinai for 12 years and knew every piece of gossip on every floor. Not because he was nosy, but because he was loud and people forgot he was there. 2:17 p.m., the corridor outside the physical therapy wing. Obi was walking with a colleague, Karen, one of the cardiac floor nurses, and they passed Eric Matthews, who was sitting in a wheelchair near the PT entrance waiting for his afternoon session. Eric had his phone out but wasn't looking at it, just sitting. "Did you hear about Dr. Young?" Obi said. Not to Eric, to Karen. But the volume Obi used, the man had one setting and it was broadcast, meant that everyone within 20 feet heard it. She came back from her ultrasound appointment this morning smiling. First time I've seen her smile in weeks, and I mean actually smile, you know? Not the polite one she does at meetings. Eric didn't move, didn't turn his head. But his jaw did the thing, the lock, the clench, the micro-movement that Jonas Singer had learned to read over 10 years, and that meant the math had started, the calculations were running, and whatever conclusion Eric Matthews was about to reach was going to change something. He sat in the wheelchair for another 6 minutes. Then he asked the PT assistant to take him back to his room. That night he called Gus Colliard. I need you to find something out. It's 11 at night, Eric. The surgeon, Dr. Amanda Young. Is she pregnant? Silence. Gus was good at silence. He was a lawyer. Silence was his instrument the way a stethoscope was Amanda's. But this one stretched. Eric. Why? Because the Boston conference was 3 months ago, and I need to know. More silence then. I'll have it by morning. The text came at 7:18 a.m. 3 words, 13 weeks. Confirmed. Eric stared at the phone. The monitor behind him beeped. The radiator ticked. Outside, Madison Avenue was waking up. A garbage truck grinding somewhere below, a siren in the distance. The particular chaos of a New York morning that never changes and never stops. He sat there for a long time. Then he got out of bed, put on the robe Jonas had brought from the apartment, walked to the elevator, rode it down 4 floors to the surgical wing. Found the corridor he'd memorized from the staff directory that his donation level gave him access to. Stopped in front of a door marked DR. Amanda Young, cardiac ablation. He knocked. Come in. He opened the door. Amanda was at her desk, charts open, coffee in a mug that said, World's OKS Doctor, reading glasses on, the tortoiseshell ones she'd started wearing 2 years into their relationship, the ones she used to take off and set on the nightstand before bed. Her lab coat was hung on the back of the chair. She was in scrubs, green, the same shade as her eyes, which was probably a coincidence and probably wasn't. She looked up, saw him, and knew. Before he said a word, before his mouth opened, she knew, the way you always know when the thing you've been dreading finally shows up at your door. Eric closed the door behind him. The lock clicked. It's mine. Not a question. A statement. An accusation and a plea and a claim, all compressed into 2 words. Amanda took off her glasses, set them on the desk, folded her hands over the chart, looked at him with the calm of someone who had spent years training herself to stay steady while everything around her fell apart. It's mine, she said, only mine, and it's going to stay that way. The office was 12 feet by 10. The fluorescent light hummed. The coffee in the mug was cold, had been cold for an hour probably, the way hers always was because she forgot to drink it. Eric didn't sit down. Amanda didn't stand up. The space between them was 6 feet. It felt like nothing, it felt like miles. Neither of them spoke for 11 seconds, then Eric turned, opened the door, and walked out. The door clicked shut. Amanda sat at her desk, motionless, hands still folded, glasses still on the desk, the chart still open to a page she wasn't reading. The fluorescent light kept humming. The war lasted 9 days. That's what it felt like. A war, except the weapons were silence and lawyers, and the careful surgical deployment of words designed to wound without leaving marks. It started the afternoon after Eric's confrontation. He called Gus Colliard from his hospital bed. Gus picked up on the first ring, because Gus always picked up on the first ring when Eric's voice sounded like that, flat, controlled, the kind of calm that precedes destruction. I want a paternity filing, and I want it by Friday. Gus was quiet for 4 seconds. Eric, you're in a hospital bed. You just had cardiac surgery. This is not the... Friday, Gus. Gus took a breath. I'll draft it. But I need to tell you, pursuing legal action against your own surgeon in the hospital that just saved your life, while she's carrying a pregnancy that you learned about through your donor-level access to her private medical records. Eric, there is no version of this that doesn't get ugly. It's already ugly. It can get uglier. Eric hung up. The monitor behind him beeped. His heart rate was elevated, 92 when it should have been in the 70s, and a nurse poked her head in to ask if everything was okay. He said yes. She didn't believe him but left anyway because that's what nurses learn to do when patients with that much money say they're fine. Amanda found out about the legal filing the next day. She was in her office when her phone buzzed. A text from Michael Marks, the surgery department director, asking her to come to his office at 3. The message was professional, brief, and had the specific temperature of a communication that's been reviewed by hospital counsel before being sent. Michael Marks was 57, grey-haired, with the kind of careful eyes that come from 30 years of navigating hospital politics. He sat behind his desk with his hands folded and said, "Amanda, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest. Okay. Did you have a prior personal relationship with Eric Matthews? She didn't flinch. Yes. When? 5 years ago. It ended. Are you pregnant? A beat. Yes. Is the patient the father? Amanda looked at Michael Marks. She'd known him for 6 years. He'd written her recommendation for the fellowship. He'd signed off on her department promotion. He was, in the limited way that hospital hierarchies allow, something like a mentor. That's a personal medical question, Michael. Amanda, his attorney, is preparing a paternity claim, and this hospital is going to have to respond to it. If there's a conflict of interest between you and a patient you operated on, a patient whose surgical consent you personally authorized, this could become an investigation, an ethics review, a news story. The office was small and smelled like old files and the peppermint tea Michael drank all day. A framed photo of his grandchildren sat on the desk. The blinds were half closed. Traffic noise from Fifth Avenue filtered through the window, the usual horns and brakes and the persistent, low-grade roar of Manhattan being Manhattan. I performed the surgery because I was the only qualified specialist available, Amanda said. The decision was clinical, not personal, and the pregnancy has nothing to do with the surgery. Amanda, I did my job, Michael. I saved his life, and now his lawyer wants to punish me for it. Michael sighed, rubbed the bridge of his nose. Nobody's punishing anyone. But I have to tell you, if this goes to an ethics board, the hospital's position is going to be complicated, and so is yours. Amanda stood up. Is there anything else? Michael looked at her for a long time. Then he said, "Be careful," which was the closest he ever got to saying, "I'm sorry." Amanda walked back to her office, closed the door, sat down. Then she picked up the phone and called the hospital's legal department. What happened next was chess. Ugly, exhausting, slow-motion chess played on a board that neither of them could leave. Amanda's legal counsel advised her that Eric's paternity filing, if pursued through the courts, would trigger an automatic review of her professional conduct. The relationship, the pregnancy, the decision to operate, everything would be examined, and the examination would be public. Gus Colliard advised Eric that Amanda's legal team would almost certainly counter-file, citing the conflict of interest as grounds for professional retaliation. The fact that Eric had used his donor-level access to obtain private medical information about a hospital employee would be, in Gus's words, a very bad look. The tabloids would run it. The business press would run it differently, but they'd run it. Matthews Capital's investors, the ones in Singapore, the ones in Dubai, the cautious European ones who valued discretion above everything, would not be amused. Both of them were trapped. Every move forward destroyed something. Addison Corday tried to intervene. She took Amanda to a Thai restaurant in Murray Hill, the one on 28th Street with the plastic chairs and the fluorescent lights and the pad Thai that was too sweet, but that they'd been eating since residency because it was cheap and open late and had become their place. "You have to talk to him," Addison said. She was stirring her iced tea with a straw, the ice cubes clinking against the glass. "Not through lawyers, not through the hospital, just talk." Amanda picked at a spring roll. She'd ordered it out of habit and wasn't hungry. Her stomach was doing the 13-week thing, not nausea exactly, but a kind of low-grade rebellion against certain smells and textures that made eating feel like a negotiation. "He left me, Addison. He looked me in the eyes and told me he never loved me and walked away. And now he wants to be a father? Now he wants to participate? I know. He doesn't get to decide when to show up. He doesn't get to skip the hard part and claim the good part." "I know, Amanda. I'm not wrong." Addison put the straw down, looked at her friend. "You're not wrong, but you're not completely right either, and I think you know that." Amanda didn't respond. She ate half the spring roll. It was lukewarm and the wrapper was soggy, and she chewed it anyway because she needed to eat, and the baby didn't care about her feelings about spring rolls. They sat there for another 40 minutes, talked about other things, work, a resident who kept mislabeling specimens, the leak in Addison's apartment in Astoria that the landlord refused to fix. Normal things, safe things. When they left, Amanda hugged Addison on the sidewalk, quick, tight, the kind of hug that says, "Thank you," and "I'm scared," and "Please don't ask me any more questions all at once." Addison watched her walk to the subway entrance on Park. Amanda went down the stairs without looking back. The turnstile beeped. She was gone. Eric hit bottom on a Tuesday. Not the cardiac kind. His heart was stable, the ablation had held, and the medical team had cleared him for discharge by end of week. This was a different kind of bottom, the kind that happens when you've spent 9 days lying in a hospital bed, fighting with lawyers, and avoiding a woman who is carrying your child 7 floors below you, and the walls of the room start to feel like they're breathing. Jonas Singer had been running Matthews Capital alone for 2 weeks. The Singapore deal was stalling. 2 board members had called Jonas directly, bypassing Eric, which never happened, asking pointed questions about leadership continuity. Xavier Chavez stood outside the door every day, answering calls from the PR team about whether Eric was going to make a statement about the personal matter that the New York Post's page 6 was apparently sniffing around. Daniel Rigg, Eric's Wharton friend, board member, the closest thing Eric had to a real confidant outside of paid professionals, came by on Tuesday afternoon. They ate lunch in the hospital cafeteria, overcooked pasta and salad that tasted like it had been made by someone who'd heard of salad but had never actually seen one. "You gotta figure this out," Daniel Rigg said. He had a way of saying things that were direct without being harsh. It was his best quality, and also the reason he'd survived 20 years in boardroom politics. Not the legal stuff, not the hospital stuff, the actual stuff between you and her. Eric pushed the pasta around his plate. "She lied to me." "She didn't tell you. There's a difference. She operated on my heart while pregnant with my kid and didn't say a word. And you told her you never loved her and walked out 5 years ago. So we're all working with imperfect resumes here, Eric." Eric looked at him. That hard stare, the one that made junior analysts at Matthews Capital sweat through their shirts. Daniel Rigg didn't blink. "What do you want me to do?" Eric asked. "I want you to stop lawyering this and start feeling it." Rigg put his fork down. "You lost your mum when you were 12. Your dad turned into a wall. You married a woman you didn't love because it was convenient. You're losing your son one cancelled weekend at a time. And now there's this woman you actually did love. Don't give me that look. I've known you since we were 22, and I know what your face does when you talk about her. And she's carrying your child, and you're responding with a paternity filing." Eric didn't answer. "Call off the lawyers, Eric. Go talk to her. Say the things you should have said 5 years ago. And if she tells you to go to hell, at least you'll know you tried." They sat in the cafeteria for another 10 minutes. Neither of them ate. The overhead speakers played something soft and forgettable. A tray clattered somewhere behind them. Daniel Rigg left at 2. Eric sat alone for a while. Then he took out his phone and called Gus Colliard. "Pull the filing." "Eric, pull it, all of it, I'm done." Gus was quiet for 3 seconds, then, "Okay." Eric was discharged on a Friday. His last night in the hospital, it rained. Not a gentle rain. One of those March storms that turn Manhattan into a grey, vertical ocean. The kind of rain that fills gutters in minutes and sends water streaming down the parking garage ramps and makes the whole city sound like it's underwater. Amanda was in the B2 level of the garage. She'd come down after her shift. 10 hours, 3 surgeries, 1 consult that ran long because the patient's family wouldn't stop asking questions she'd already answered twice. She was exhausted in the way that goes past tired and into a kind of numbness where your body moves but your brain has checked out. She hadn't changed out of her scrubs. Her lab coat was still on, the medium one that was starting to feel tight again. Her shoes were the orthopedic clogs that every surgeon wears and that are the ugliest footwear in existence, but that keep your feet alive during 12-hour shifts. She stood beside the Honda Civic, one hand on the roof, the other on her stomach. The rain was coming down the ramp in sheets pooling on the concrete, turning the garage into something that echoed and dripped and smelled like wet asphalt and exhaust. She was crying, quietly, the way she'd learned as a kid, no sound, barely any movement, just her eyes and the hitch in her breathing. The way you cry when you figured out early that nobody comes when you call, so you stop making noise. The stairwell door opened. Eric came through it, dressed in his own clothes for the first time in 2 weeks. Dark pants, grey cashmere sweater, leather shoes that cost more than her car payment. He had a bag in one hand, his phone in the other. Jonas had texted 7 times in the last 20 minutes. Xavier was waiting upstairs with the black Escalade. He stopped when he saw her, 5 meters between them, the rain on the ramp. The fluorescent garage lights casting everything in that flat, greenish tone that makes everyone look slightly sick. Amanda didn't move, didn't wipe her face, didn't pretend she wasn't crying. She was past pretending. Eric put the bag down, put the phone in his pocket. He walked toward her, not fast, not with purpose or performance, or any of the controlled intensity that defined how he moved through the world, just slowly, like a man who had finally run out of ways to avoid the thing in front of him. He stopped about a meter away, close enough to hear her breathing, far enough that he wasn't touching her. He turned and leaned against the car beside her, facing the same direction, the ramp, the rain, the grey nothing of a parking garage at 9 p.m. "I called off the lawyer," he said, quiet, not looking at her. She didn't respond. "I shouldn't have. The legal stuff, the threats, that was wrong." He paused. His hand went to his chest, automatic, the gesture he'd developed in the hospital, checking that his heart was still beating. "I was scared. And when I get scared, I do. That, the cold thing, the control thing, you know." She knew. "And what I said to you, 5 years ago, in the apartment." His voice cracked, actually cracked, like drywall giving way. "That I didn't love you, that I never—" He stopped, pressed his palm against his sternum. "That was the biggest lie I've ever told, and I've told a lot of lies. It's practically my job." Amanda didn't move. The rain kept coming. Her hand stayed on her stomach. "I don't know how to do this," Eric said. "I don't know how to be a father. I had a bad example, and I've been proving it ever since. Ask Daniel. Ask Allison. I'm a disaster at the things that actually matter." A breath, shaky. "But I want to try. Not because of the law, not because of rights or custody or any of that. Because this—" He put his hand on the car beside hers, not touching. "This is the thing I've been running from my whole life, and I'm tired of running." Silence. 10 seconds. 20. Amanda turned her head, looked at him. Her eyes were red. Her mascara was smudged. She'd forgotten to take it off again the way she always forgot, the way she'd been forgetting since residency, because there was always something more important than her own face. "You destroyed me," she said, and her voice wasn't angry, wasn't cold. It was just honest, the way voices are when there's nothing left to protect. "You looked me in the eyes and you destroyed me. And I rebuilt myself from scratch, and I swore I would never let you do it again. I know. I'm not letting you do it again. I know." "So what makes this different?" Eric looked at her. The rain was on his face now. He'd stepped forward without realizing it, into the water running down the ramp. His sweater was getting soaked. The cashmere was ruined. He didn't seem to notice. "Because last time I walked away," he said. "And this time, I'm standing in a parking garage in the rain, in a sweater that cost $800, telling you I'm terrified, and I'm not leaving until you believe me." Amanda looked at him for a long time. Then she did something that surprised both of them. She laughed, a short, wet, exhausted laugh, the kind that lives somewhere between crying and giving up and something else, something she couldn't name yet. "Your sweater's ruined," she said. "I know. You look ridiculous." "I know. This doesn't fix anything." "I know." She turned away, looked at the rain on the ramp. Her hand was still on her stomach. His hand was still on the car beside hers. The distance between their fingers was about an inch. Neither of them closed it. Not yet, but neither of them moved away. The rain kept falling. The garage echoed with it, water on concrete, water on metal, water running down the ramp and pooling near the drain. A car alarm went off somewhere on the street above, then stopped. They stood there, 2 people who had spent their lives learning how to leave, trying to figure out how to stay. The fluorescent light above them flickered once, twice, then held steady. 8 months later. The brownstone was on a quiet block in Brooklyn Heights, 3 streets back from the promenade, close enough to hear the hum of the BQE if the windows were open, but far enough that it faded into background noise. It was the kind of building that had been standing since before either of them was born. Brick face, original moldings, A front stoop with wrought iron railings that needed repainting, and a mailbox that stuck every time you opened it. Amanda had found it. Not Eric. She'd been the one scrolling through listings on her phone during her third trimester, lying on the couch in her Gramercy apartment, with her feet propped up on a pillow and a bowl of cereal balanced on what used to be her lap. She'd sent the link to Eric at 11:30 at night with no message, just the listing. He'd responded at 11:32, "Let's go see it." They'd gone on a Saturday. Amanda was 34 weeks pregnant, and walking was an event. Slow, deliberate, one hand on the railing and one on the lower back pain that had become her constant companion. Eric was beside her, not holding her arm, not hovering, just there, present, close enough. The realtor, a woman named Diane with a clipboard and a smile that was doing too much, had started her pitch in the foyer, something about pre-war charm and original hardwood, but she stopped when she noticed Amanda staring at the kitchen, not at the counters or the appliances or any of the things realtors want you to notice, at the window. A big window above the sink facing east, and the light coming through it was the kind of light that makes dust motes visible and turns an ordinary room into something you want to sit in. "This one," Amanda said. Eric looked at her. "You haven't seen the upstairs?" "I don't need to." He bought it that afternoon. The baby came on a Thursday in August, 6:42 in the morning. Tomayu Langone. Amanda refused to deliver at Mount Sinai because she said, "I'm not having a baby in the building where I operate on hearts. That's too many medical events in one location." Eric didn't argue. The labor was 14 hours. Amanda was not a graceful patient. She threw a cup of ice chips at the wall at hour 9, told Eric to stop breathing so loudly at hour 11, called Addison Corday at hour 13 and said, "If you tell me to relax one more time, I swear to God I will end your medical career." Addison, on speakerphone from the waiting room, said, "You're doing great, sweetie." Amanda said something that shouldn't be repeated. The baby was a girl. 7 pounds 1 ounce, brown hair, green eyes, Amanda's green. The exact shade that Eric had spent 5 years trying to forget, and now couldn't stop looking at. They named her Claire, not after anyone, not for any symbolic reason. Amanda just liked the name, and Eric said, "Yeah, that works," which was the most decisive he'd been about anything non-financial in his entire life. Eric held Claire for the first time at 6:53 a.m., 11 minutes after she was born. He was sitting in the chair beside Amanda's bed, still wearing the shirt he'd thrown on at 4 in the morning, when Amanda had shaken him awake and said, "It's time," with a voice that was both terrified and completely sure. The shirt was wrinkled. There was a coffee stain on the sleeve from the cup he'd grabbed in the lobby, and then spilled because his hands were shaking. Claire was small, impossibly small. She fit in the crook of his arm like she'd been designed for it. Her face was red and scrunched and furious, the way newborns always look, like they're already disappointed with the world they've just arrived in. She had Amanda's nose, his chin, fingers so tiny they didn't seem real. Eric looked at her, and something happened. Not the movie version, not the swelling music and the single tear and the perfectly lit close-up. Something messier, something that started in his chest and expanded outward, filling the spaces he'd kept empty for 27 years, the spaces John Kramer had sealed shut on a kitchen floor in Texas. It hurt, actually hurt, the way muscles hurt when you use them for the first time in years, like stretching something that had atrophied. He didn't say anything, just sat there, holding this tiny, angry person, his daughter. Amanda watched him from the bed. She was exhausted, the kind of exhaustion that goes past physical into something cellular, like her body had been disassembled and put back together slightly different. Her hair was plastered to her forehead. The hospital gown was twisted. She looked terrible. She looked at Eric, holding Claire, and she saw something she'd never seen on his face before. Not in 2 years of dating, not in the breakup, not in the hospital, not in the parking garage, not in any of the hard, careful months of rebuilding that had followed. Surrender, complete, unconditional surrender, to a 7-pound baby with green eyes. "You okay?" she asked. Her voice was raw. Eric looked up. His eyes were wet. He didn't try to hide it. "Yeah," he said. I think I'm okay. The first months were chaos. Claire didn't sleep. Or rather, she slept in 45-minute intervals that had no relationship to day or night or anything resembling a schedule. Amanda, who had once performed an 8-hour surgery on 3 hours of sleep, discovered that surgical residency was a vacation compared to a newborn. Eric, who had once closed a $4 billion merger while flying from Tokyo to New York, discovered that a baby who wouldn't stop crying at 3 a.m. was more complex than any negotiation he'd ever managed. They fought. Of course they fought. Not the old fights, not the cold, precise destruction of 5 years ago, but the new kind. The kind that happens when two people are running on no sleep, and one of them forgot to buy diapers, and the other one loaded the dishwasher wrong, and someone has to get up because Claire is screaming again, and neither of them wants to be the one, but both of them get up anyway. Which leads to an argument about who's more tired, which is an argument nobody ever wins. They fought about small things. Who forgot the pacifier? Whether the bottle was too warm? Why Eric kept putting Claire's onesies in the wrong drawer? Why Amanda corrected his swaddling technique in front of Addison? They made up about small things too. Eric brought Amanda coffee at 2 a.m. The good kind from the French press, not the Keurig, because he'd noticed she winced at the Keurig coffee and hadn't said anything. Amanda fell asleep on Eric's shoulder on the couch one night, while Claire was finally, miraculously, sleeping in the bassinet. And neither of them moved for 3 hours, because waking up would mean acknowledging that the couch was uncomfortable, and their necks would hurt in the morning, and neither of them cared. The brownstone in Brooklyn Heights filled up. Not with furniture. That came too. The careful, slow process of turning a house into a place people lived, but with noise. Claire crying, Claire laughing, when she started laughing, which was at 12 weeks and sounded like a hiccup, and made Eric's face do something that Jonas Singer described as genuinely alarming. The creak of the third stair, which Eric kept saying he'd fix and hadn't. The clatter of Amanda's coffee mug on the kitchen counter at 5 a.m. The sound of the mailbox sticking, and someone cursing and then laughing. Daniel Matthews came for Thanksgiving, 16 years old, still tall, still awkward, still had those blue eyes that couldn't hide anything. He showed up with a backpack and the same half-tied sneakers and stood in the doorway of the brownstone looking at his father, who was holding a baby in one arm and a spatula in the other, wearing an apron that said, "Kiss the cook," that Amanda had bought as a joke and that Eric wore without irony. "Hey," Daniel said. "Hey." Eric shifted Claire to his other arm. "Come in. Watch the stair. The third one creaks." Daniel came in. He looked at Claire. Claire looked at him with the wide, unfocused stare of a 3-month-old who doesn't understand anything but somehow sees everything. "She's small," Daniel said. "She's 3 months old. They're all small. Can I—" Daniel gestured vaguely. His hands were in his pockets. He pulled them out. Eric handed Claire over. "Carefully, the way you hand someone something that's simultaneously the most fragile and most important thing in the world." Daniel held her with the stiffness of someone who has never held a baby and is convinced he's doing it wrong. Claire grabbed his finger. The whole hand wrapped around one index finger and held on. Daniel looked at Eric. Something moved across his face, something complicated and young and old at the same time. "She's got a grip," he said. "Yeah." Eric's voice was thick. "She does." Amanda watched from the kitchen doorway, leaning against the frame, arms crossed, still in the scrub pants she'd worn home from the hospital because she hadn't bothered to change. Her hair was in a messy ponytail. There was baby formula on her shirt, the left shoulder, a stain she'd given up on. She watched this teenager hold this baby, and she watched Eric watch them, and she felt something settle inside her. Not happiness. That was too simple a word. Something more like recognition, like looking at a picture you've been carrying in your head for years and realizing it's finally real. A year later, Eric sold Matthews Capital, not all of it. He retained a minority stake and a board seat, but the day-to-day, the calls at midnight, the flights to Singapore, the quarterly reports that 8 weekends whole, he let it go. Jonas Singer became CEO. Xavier Chavez went with Jonas. Eric didn't need a security chief anymore, and Xavier was too good to waste on school drop-offs and grocery runs. Gus Colliard, who had been Eric's lawyer for 15 years, called the decision either the smartest or the dumbest thing you've ever done. Eric said, "I'm okay with not knowing which." Amanda went back to surgery 6 months after Claire was born, part-time at first and 3 days a week then 4. Addison Corday covered her cases on the days she was out. The cardiac ablation unit didn't collapse without her, which was both a relief and slightly insulting, because Amanda had spent years believing it would. Claire went to a daycare in Cobble Hill, the one on Atlantic Avenue with the yellow door and the teacher named Ms. Rosa, who sang songs in Spanish and English, and who Claire adored with the single-minded devotion of a 1-year-old, who has found her person. On the mornings when Eric did drop off, he'd walk back to the brownstone alone, through the streets of Brooklyn Heights, past the brownstones and the bodegas and the coffee shop on Montague that always had a line, and he'd think about his father. About John Kramer sitting on a kitchen floor in Texas, holding a dead woman's hand. About the piano that got sold. About the silence that filled a house for 27 years. And he'd think about Claire, about the way she laughed, that hiccup sound that cracked him open every single time. About the way Amanda looked at him in the morning, half asleep, hair everywhere, no makeup. The least composed version of herself, and how that was the version he loved most. He didn't say "I love you" easily. It was still hard. The words felt foreign in his mouth, like speaking a language he'd learned late and wasn't fluent in. But he said them. At night, when Claire was asleep and the house was quiet and Amanda was reading on the couch with her feet in his lap, he'd say it. And she'd look up, and sometimes she'd say it back, and sometimes she'd just touch his hand, and both versions meant the same thing. It wasn't perfect. They still fought. Amanda still worked too much. Eric still got cold when he was scared. Not the old cold, the destructive kind, but a smaller version. A closing off that Amanda had learned to recognize and wait out. They went to therapy, couples therapy on Tuesdays. A woman named Dr. Patel on the Upper West Side, who charged $400 an hour and was worth every cent because she had no patience for Eric's deflections and no sympathy for Amanda's martyrdom. It was work. All of it. Every day. But they showed up. Both of them. Every day. On a Sunday in October, 1 year and 2 months after Claire was born, Amanda was standing at the kitchen window of the brownstone in Brooklyn Heights, the one that faced east, the one with the morning light that had made her say "this one" before she'd seen the rest of the house. Claire was in the high chair, smearing banana on the tray with both hands and laughing about it. Eric was at the stove making pancakes, badly because Eric Matthews could negotiate a $4 billion deal, but could not flip a pancake to save his life, and the kitchen smelled like batter and slight burning. The radiator in the hallway clanked. It always did when the heat kicked on. The third stair creaked. It always did when anyone stepped on it. Amanda's phone buzzed on the counter. She didn't look at it. She stood at the window, watched the light come in, listened to Claire laughing and Eric swearing quietly at a pancake and the radiator clanking and all the imperfect, ordinary, unremarkable sounds of a life she never planned and couldn't imagine losing. Her hand rested on the counter. The coffee in her mug, the one that said "World's OK, Doctor," was getting cold. She didn't drink it, just held on to it. Outside, Brooklyn Heights was doing its Sunday thing. Church bells from somewhere on Hicks Street. A dog barking. The distant rumble of the subway under Montague. Everything was ordinary. Everything was enough. And you? What would you do if you had the chance to start over?